As I sit here watching futures markets on the eve of the first Fed rate cut of the cycle, which I'm sure, as you know, was 50 basis points, the only conclusion I can come to is just about everyone is lying to you. Okay, I'm going to explain what I mean here in this video, what you should really expect out of markets over the coming months, and what today actually signified. Because it wasn't just the Fed cutting rates to get back to neutral faster. That's not what happened. They're the first one that lied to you. In fact, it is Jerome Powell's job to lie to you when the house is starting to catch fire. What I mean by this, if Powell got on the podium today and said what was actually going on in the economy, it would have been a self-fulfilling prophecy. Companies would start firing people and laying people off. And that's just not something the Fed wants to do. So in fact, imagine it like this. There's a house behind Powell. If things are great, it's a beautiful home. As things are starting to go sideways, that thing's catching on fire. It's enough to know it's on fire. Powell knows that house is on fire, but it's not enough to point it out to the rest of the crowd. Now, when the house is completely on fire, then there's no mistaking it. When we go into recession, then Powell's forced to acknowledge that. But before people catch on the house is on fire, he's trying to put that out as fast as possible. And that is what the 50 basis point cut today was all about. Because just instinctively think about what raising rates does to the economy. I think we all know what raising rates does to the economy. It makes borrowing money more expensive, homes, cars, student loans, credit cards, the whole shebang. Now, when the Fed is raising rates, it's usually a good time to be invested in markets because the economy is doing really good. If there's high inflation, that means there's high economic activity. Versa, when the Fed is cutting rates, it's usually not a time you want to be in the economy because there's usually low economic activity, low inflation, and potentially going into a recession. So what a lot of people fail to kind of think about, when the Fed is cutting rates, and like today opted to do 50 basis points, they're actually trying to boost consumer spending. They're trying to get people to spend more money, to prop up the economy a little bit. Because why? Companies are getting pretty close to the point of laying people off. We actually seen this in the Beige Book that just came out a couple of weeks ago. Take a listen to this. This has to be the worst Beige Book I have seen since the COVID shutdown days, which is kind of what we, already knew, at least at that time. The Beige Book for the month of August says, overall economic activity. Economic activity grew slightly in 3 districts, while the number of districts that reported flat or declining activity rose from 5 the prior month to 9 in the current month. 66% of essentially the US is in declining economic activity territory, and only 33% of the economy is growing. But it's only growing slightly. They made sure to put that in there. Grew slightly in 3 districts. It goes on to say, employment levels were steady overall, although there were isolated reports that firms filled only necessary positions, reduced hours and shifts, or lowered overall employment levels through attrition. Still, reports of layoffs remained rare. That's why the Fed cut 50 basis points today, because you are seeing the clear and obvious weakness. The house has caught on fire, ladies and gentlemen, but it's not totally ablaze just yet. Layoffs, they're rare. They're starting though. It goes on to say here, on balance, wage growth was modest, while increases in non-labor input costs and selling prices ranged from slight to moderate. Consumer spending ticked down in most districts, having generally held steady during the prior reporting period. So in July, consumer spending was steady. In August, most districts reported a decline in consumer spending. Unfortunately, the government data that we're getting right now is not accurate. This is much more accurate. With that said, it says auto sales continue to vary by district, with some noting increases in sales and others reported slowing sales because of elevated interest rates and high vehicle prices. Manufacturing activity declined in most districts, and 2 districts noted that these declines were part of ongoing contractions in the sector. So manufacturing declined in most districts, but 2 districts have been really bad. Okay. It says residential construction and real estate activity were mixed, though most district reports indicated softer home sales. Likewise, reports on commercial construction and real estate activity were mixed. District contacts generally expected economic activity to remain stable or to improve somewhat in the coming months, though contacts in 3 districts anticipated slight declines. So the only positive from this Beige Book is that some district contacts, generally expected economic activity to remain stable or improve somewhat in the coming months. That is the only positive line in this entire summary of economic activity from Fed districts. Now, for anyone that did not read the Beige Book when it came out a couple of weeks ago, that may be a slap in the face to you. When you think about what Powell said today, Powell was as dovish as he could have possibly been today. He was asked multiple times, is this 50 basis point cut a sign of greater weakening to come? He said, look, things are fine. He said the economy is good. Good. That's not what we heard from the Beige Book just a couple of weeks ago. So the Fed is, one, either just incompetent, they have no idea what they're doing, or 2, because I don't believe number 1. Number 2 is they told us what we need to hear, not the truth. What we need to hear is the economy is good. You know, layoffs are rare, that the unemployment rate is at a healthy level, and Jerome Powell's expecting a soft landing. Again, because when the house is on fire, you don't want to point that out to people if you can, like, put the fire out, right? That's what happened today. And honestly, it's a pretty noble job. Like, think about it from this perspective. Jerome Powell could have been honest with us today and said, the economy's kind of going down the poop chute. There's a 50% chance of a recession over the next 3, 6, 12 months. Markets would have sold off. Hedges would have profited nice tendies, and Wall Street would have bought the dip. So essentially reward Wall Street. Reward the rich people. At the same time, you're going to get regular people like citizens that start to lose their jobs because of theoretically what Powell could have said today on the podium if he was honest. Like, Jerome Powell could have been the kickstart of a recession if he was honest. So that's like helping Wall Street and hurting Main Street. That's not what government officials like to do, at least publicly. And that's not what the Fed likes to do. The Fed's not in the business of helping Wall Street and hurting Main Street ever. And that is why the Fed lied to you today. The Fed blatantly lied to you today. Let's acknowledge that. What Jerome Powell said today was a script, because he's not able to just go out there and be honest. Like, honesty does not get you rewarded as the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Never once has a Federal Reserve official gotten an award or kept their job for being honest about economic activity, especially when the economy is slowing down, possibly heading into a recession. In fact, if Powell was honest today and told us, like, hey, we could be going into a recession here, he would be blamed as the bad guy, the guy that cried wolf, that started the recession. Jerome Powell's legacy is not going to be one of he got up on the podium and kickstarted a recession that may or may not have come. And again, earlier in this video, I explained what the purpose actually is of the Fed lowering rates. Again, it is to boost consumer spending, because when consumers spend more money, companies do better and they don't need to lay people off. The larger the cut, the more stimulating needs to be done. It It doesn't matter what neutral is. It doesn't matter where the federal funds rate is. If the economy was doing just fine, the Fed would literally pause and not do anything with the federal funds rate until we hit 2% inflation. Maybe even undershot 2% inflation. The Fed cut rates 50 basis points today because the economy is weakening. And that's not what you heard from Powell on that podium. What you heard from Powell on that podium is things are just fine. Now, it's also important to point this out in a historical context point of view. From 1995 through 2024, you had 5 rate cutting cycles. 3 of them started with 25 basis point cuts, and 2 of them started with 50. Both instances of 50 basis point cuts, you had deep recessions. This was 2001 and 2007, both of which markets were down double digits a year later. And 2 years later, in 2007, the S&P was down 26.3%. And 2 years after 2001, the markets were down 30.6%. Those are huge declines. Even 4 years later, after 2007, the S&P was down 12.6%. And 4 years later, after 2001, the S&P was down 4.8%. So, like, you're talking multi-year downturn. The last time the Fed cut rates 50 basis points at the first Fed meeting. Now, in instances, the Fed cut 25 basis points. 1995, the infamous soft landing. The S&P was up 21.5% 1 year later. In 1998, the S&P was up 22.5% 1 year later after the Fed started their cutting cycle with a 25 basis point cut. In 2019, the Fed started with a 25 basis point cut, and markets were up 13% 1 year later. Now, would I be surprised if markets rally over the next couple of days? I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't think it's going to be long-lived. I don't think it's going to be long-lived because we have bad seasonal activity in September. September's just a bad month. The second half of September is the worst second half of any month. Worst 2-week period of any month of any year, okay? You have the election coming up. You have Q3 earnings coming up with expectations for 2025 EPS at through the roof, right? There's a lot of room for disappointment or pricing in the election for that matter over the next couple of weeks. Would I be surprised if the markets just assumably believe the Fed that everything's fine and they just cut rates 50 basis points and stocks do well for a couple days? I wouldn't be shocked if that happened. Should it happen? No. Wall Street should be able to see through what Powell said to the facts, like I am to you here in this video. But are they smart enough to do that? Are they knowledgeable enough to do that? Some are, some are not. Now, the Fed referenced this next part in the press conference today. He basically said the jobs data is unreliable because of the big revisions that we are getting. And that was part of the reason the Fed was prompted to do 50 basis points. Okay, that's correct. The data is not correct. The data is just wrong. It's blatantly wrong. Now, whoever's punching in numbers with the BLS, with the government, I don't know why they're punching in the wrong numbers, but they're punching in the wrong numbers. So unfortunately, it's going to take some time for the real economy to catch up to what the data says the real economy is doing. Now, it is possible that we are already in a recession, but we may not know that for 6 months. Unfortunately. Now, I don't know if we're in a recession or not, but I will tell you, if we do have a soft landing, it was because of Powell today. It was because Powell was able to give markets a 50 basis point cut and paint the picture that the economy is just fine. Jerome Powell is like the best actor, one of the best actors that ever lived, because I don't think he believes half of what he said today on the podium, that the economy is just fine and there's no reason to believe that there's going to be a sharper downturn. I think Powell is a very smart individual, and I don't think that's what Powell believes. Now, what does this mean for equity investors, for yourself? Like I said, there is a a decent chance that markets go higher over the next couple of days. If you're a trader, if you're a speculator, a gambler, whatever terminology you like to use, I personally don't like the term gambler, I like speculator more, then it's kind of a toss-up what happens over the next couple of days in markets. Do we sell the news? Do we rally for a couple of days? I do think eventually, a week or two from now, maybe a couple days from now, we do see some downside, because now we're done with the first Fed cut. Whether or not Wall Street understands the implications of 50 basis points and what's actually happening in the economy, that's one thing. But we also have election uncertainty. We also have Q3 earnings that start up here soon with expectations that are through the roof. So there's a lot of fuel on the fire to disappoint investors. It's like gasoline, little, balloons filled with gasoline just hanging over the fire, ready to be popped and ignite the fire, okay? That's kind of where we are in markets in the short term. Whether or not, let's say, the next couple of months are good or bad will really come down to how the economy does. And as I alluded to earlier in this video, I don't think the economy is accurately being reflected in the economic data. And I do think after the election, you're probably going to get more accurate government data coming to us. And I will tell you right now, the markets are not priced for any further weakening in the economy. So when the economic data does start to signal what we see in the economy today, that things are slowing down, you are going to see downside in markets. Now, the more weakening you see, the more downside you will see. If we only see a little bit of weakening, then maybe a little bit of downside would be appropriate. But I do find it very hard to be bullish on markets really over the next 6 months. Like, until we have clarity on the economy, it's hard to be all in this market, especially after the 50 basis point cut we got today and the Fed blatantly lying to us. Again, they have to lie to us. They're not going to help you out. They're not going to help your puts go in the money, okay? That's not the Fed's job. Versus, right, people losing their jobs because the Fed was honest on the podium. That's not what the Fed is supposed to do. It would be immoral to actually be honest with you today. But I also think there is the risk that we just kind of creep towards a recession, don't actually go into one, and by the time the election's over, maybe the economy's not as bad. If we do have 3 cuts, 75 basis points of cuts in us, maybe things can start to normalize a little bit. And I do think there is a risk of completely sitting out this market as well. That's why right now there's so many opportunities, because small caps, dividend, value companies are very appropriately priced for the risk in the economy. The toss-up between recession or no recession. A lot of those stocks are already pricing in a recession. The areas that are not priced well for a recession are like big tech, right? Some of your AI stocks. So I think if you want to be in this market, you want to be in small caps and dividend and value. A very defensive portfolio can work well if the economy accelerates from here, if we actually do have a soft landing. And that's if you want to be invested in our markets. That makes the most sense to me. But cash is ultimately king right now. So let me know what you think about this information down below in the comment section. Hit the like button as well as subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. You guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.